This video was made with support from my patrons, whose names are on screen now. If you want to, you can join them today and even get access to exclusive content. The link to my Patreon is in the description, so check it out if you're interested. Anyway, on with the show. Prize cars in Gran Turismo. I absolutely love them. If you've been following my channel, that might be obvious given just how often I mention them. But to me, prize cars are one of the best things about classic Gran Turismo. Within a single playthrough of one of these games, they are the biggest variable that can lead people to have unique experiences. A single prize car you receive can go on to define a large part of your playthrough, so their impact cannot be underestimated. Maybe it's just a car that you think is cool, but a lot of the time, a prize car's worth is determined by how useful it is to you in your specific situation. So it's not surprising that whenever I've talked about prize cars in the past, it was usually about the ones that had the potential to completely break a playthrough, wherein the requirements to obtain the car didn't exactly match up with the performance or value of the car itself, thus allowing you to effectively sequence break the game. But this idea can work in the opposite direction as well, where the prize car you're given does not live up to the time and effort you had to put in to get it. And let's just say that there's no shortage of those throughout the history of Gran Turismo either. Let me show you what I mean. So if we're talking about bad prize cars, there's no better place to start than Gran Turismo 3. GT3 is often known as one of the hardest Gran Turismos to progress through, especially for newcomers, so having knowledge of the events will help massively. In the early game, it's very easy to get stuck in a cycle where you just keep earning cars which are worse than what you already have, and aren't much more useful either. I feel like the one-make races are the biggest offender here, especially in the beginner league where the game just seems obsessed with giving you the car you would already need to have to complete the event in the first place. For example, the new Beetle Cup, in which you'll most likely need the Beetle RSI to win, gives you the Beetle RSI for winning it. Or the Legend of Silver Arrow Mercedes one-make event, in which you win the Mercedes SLK. But given the cost of the other Mercedes cars in the game, and the fact you can't win any of them without already owning a Mercedes, you will almost certainly have to use a tuned-up SLK for this event. So again, the prize is redundant. If you want to dive into some endurance racing, the Roadster Endurance is a great place to start. But sadly, 3 of your 4 possible prizes will just be more Mazda Roadsters. But given that the 4th possible prize car is so unbelievably overpowered, that does make up for it somewhat. The Tourist Trophy is a one-make event for the Audi TT, so naturally, your possible prize cars are all Audi TTs, obviously. But the difference here is that these ones all come in special colours that cannot be bought from the dealership, so that's something at least. And the same is true in the Beginner League Vit/Yaris race, where your possible prize cars are... you get the idea. In fact, you can win special colour Vit/Yaris from 4 different events, with 2 of those being guaranteed. They even take up a total of 8 prize car slots throughout the entire game. They were very insistent on the player winning the special colour versions of this car. Due to its meme status in the Gran Turismo community, this car doesn't need much more of an explanation, but check out the pink Vits section of my meme cars video if you want to know more. Here's a fun fact, the name Vits is derived from the German word Witz, which means joke. So the pink Vit literally means the pink joke, which is very appropriate. Although they renamed it to Yaris in Europe, so I'm not really sure what the point of naming it Vits in the first place even was. Anyway, whilst we're on the theme of one-make events, let's hop over to Gran Turismo 4. There are more one-make events in GT4 than basically anything else, so again, there's bound to be more examples here. Once more, we can find events which give out special colour versions of the car you would already have, like the Citroen 2CV in Pesh, Subaru 360 in World Rally Blue Mika, and another special colour Vits, but this one is specifically orange. And beyond just the special colour cars, there are some other interesting prize choices. The Midget 2 race gives you the original Daihatsu Midget 1, the 3-wheeled menace. There's also the Clio Trophy. In this event, you'll be up against the Clio Trophy race cars, however said race car is not available to purchase, meaning that you'll have to use an upgraded Clio V6 road car. So, what do you get for winning the Clio Trophy? You've guessed it, the Clio Trophy race car. But your road car would now be just as fast, if not faster, than the race car, so it's pretty much redundant. Speaking of redundant, GT4 also has a habit of handing out concept cars as prizes. In the beginner league alone, of the 8 events featured, 3 of them give out concept cars. The problem with concept cars, specifically in GT4, is that they can't be used for a whole lot. Many events do not allow them, as they're not considered as normal cars, and some of the more radical concepts can't be used in any races at all. Cars like the Toyota Motor Triathlon race car and Nike One 2022 fall under this category. The thing with these useless prize cars is that if you didn't want them, you could just sell them for a bit of quick cash. But GT4 doesn't allow you to sell concept cars, so if you don't want them, you're just stuck with them. But at least it isn't that taxing to earn these cars, so it's not a massive loss. The Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint Speciale is a fine car, so winning it from a championship for classic cars is to be expected. But when that championship is the 1000 miles event, taking roughly a combined 12 hours to complete, it just isn't really good enough. Hey, at least it looks good. GT4 was the first Gran Turismo to give prize cars for completing licenses at bronze and silver levels. This is pretty neat, and means you can fairly easily start the game with something like a Nismo 270R. But they weren't that generous when it came to the gold prizes. For achieving gold in the S license, your prize is the Ford Model T. An extremely influential vehicle when it comes to the history of the motor car, but in GT4, its 20 horsepower isn't really enough to do much of anything. Not as if the game would allow you to try anyway. So, literally one of the hardest things in GT4 gives you one of the slowest and least useful cars. Still, better than say putting it in an exclusive dealership for 20 million credits. I mean, who would think that's a good idea? It would be a mistake to think that slow, classic cars as prizes are exclusive to GT4 however. In fact, its direct successor, Gran Turismo 5, is just as guilty. Through the game's early events in the beginner and amateur leagues, you'll be bombarded with slow, mostly classic cars which aren't really useful for much. Cars like the Subaru 360, Kubelwagen, Citroen 2CV, Daihatsu Midget, all of your favourites are here. And don't think the B-Spec is much better, because over there you'll find things like the original Fiat 500 and Volkswagen Beetle. With a couple of exceptions, you have to wait until the professional league before you'll start finding cars that are worth your while. Of course, this isn't an issue in Gran Turismo 7, given the way that its career is laid out in such a linear order. None of the prize cars are really noticeably good or bad, they're all just sort of meh. But this doesn't extend to the entire game. In places like the License Center and Mission events, there's a lot more freedom. There's a much wider selection of prize cars like you find in the older titles, ranging from compact cars to classic cars, supercars, race and rally cars, there's a bit of everything. In update 1.31, a new set of 8 one-hour endurance races were added to the missions. I've said many times how I think this is the best part of GT7, but there's one thing that I've never talked about which I don't think is so great: the prize cars. For all bronze, you receive the Nissan Fairlady Z 432, and for gold, the Aston Martin DB5. They aren't the worst, but given how long these take, 8 hours in total, and the fact that some of these races are really quite hard, then it's understandable why some would feel shortchanged by this. It is by far the thing that requires the most time investment in this game, and also one of the most difficult. Given the lack of prize cars in GT7, they had plenty of options to choose from. Maybe a higher end race car, like an LMP1 or Group C prototype, to even much more valuable classic cars. But by now, we all know what GT7 is about, and winning races to earn prize cars is not it. So let's just be grateful that we even have these at all. Terrible prize cars have been part of Gran Turismo from the very beginning. Back in the original Gran Turismo, there was the hard-tuned car speed contest, which was one of the tougher championships where you faced some hard-tuned cars, as the name suggests. Like most events in GT1, there are 2 possible prize cars for this event. The first is an R32 Skyline GTR. The second is a Toyota AE86. So yeah, a bit of a difference. Remember the special colour prize cars from GT3 and 4? Well, that actually started in GT1. A lot of the prize cars in this game come in unique colours which you cannot get from the dealerships. So, let's take a look at which colours the AE86 comes in. Oh.
It's pink!
And that's just one example. You can find some pretty cool and pretty cursed colour combinations in this game. There's also a
pink
Civic, a teal Supra, a green Evo 4 with gold wheels, and a yellow CRX with red wheels, among plenty more. With Gran Turismo always having a focus on Japanese cars, of course tuned cars would be included in some capacity. Gran Turismo 2 was where this really started to become evident, with many models from various Japanese tuners included in the game. And the way the game handled these types of cars was to give many of them out as prize cars. And when I say many, I mean many. If we look at the special events, which make up the majority of the game, there is a total of 67 prize cars available from the different events. Of those, 34 are aftermarket and factory-tuned Japanese cars from the likes of Mugen, Nismo, TRD, Mines, Spoon, Mazda Speed, etc. That is more than half. Now on paper, that doesn't necessarily sound like a bad thing. So they wanted to give out these tuned cars as prizes. What's the big deal? Well, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's more to do with the implications. So GT2 expanded the car list from GT1 with a lot more international models from the US and Europe. But something that you can't fully appreciate until you do a full playthrough of GT2 is the bias towards Japanese cars. Now, this bias has always existed in Gran Turismo to some degree, given that it's a Japanese-developed game, but in my opinion, GT2 has by far the strongest bias, other than GT1 where non-Japanese cars barely existed, of course. And this is why I see these prize cars as a bit of a problem, because you need to think about this from a gameplay perspective. Including those tuned cars, 55 of the 67 prize cars in the special events are Japanese, so the vast majority of your garage will be Japanese. You then need to consider that the Japanese cars in GT2 are far better valued than the US and particularly European cars. So there's little reason to buy non-Japanese cars, and the Japanese exclusive used dealership only exacerbates this even more. I'm pretty sure there's only 1 or 2 non-Japanese cars you can even buy as your starter car, and one of them is the original Fiat 500. Compare this to Japanese cars where for similar money you can get a Skyline R32 or first-gen Toyota MR2. It's not even close. So essentially, prize cars could have been used to balance this out by giving more of the US and European cars out as prizes, but for some reason they didn't. And this sucks because GT2 has tons of interesting and unique international cars, but the game gives you no reason to own them unless you feel like wasting a large amount of money for basically no reason. Even the events for the cars from these countries don't have any restriction on the nationality, so there is literally no reason to have them. And this is where the prize cars they did choose starts to get grating. In my own playthrough of GT2, I remember completing the first race of the Historic Car Cup at Tahiti Road and winning the Mugen CRX Pro 3, which already doesn't make much sense. But then, not long after, I won the second race of the 80s Sports Car Cup at Special Stage Route 5 and received another Mugen CRX. The third race of the Historic Car Cup at Grindelwald gives you what was a then brand new Toyota XYR Concept. How the fuck does that make any sense? Think of all of the other interesting cars they could have chosen instead that would have made way more sense and preferably could have added more variety to your garage by being a US or European car. That is just one example, but there are plenty more, such as why can you only win Japanese cars from the GT European League? It just feels like at some point they kind of gave up and started throwing whatever prize cars at whichever events with no real rhyme or reason. And that's a shame because frankly, this is probably my biggest issue with GT2. To be honest, that probably says more about the quality of the game rather than it being some sort of game-breaking problem. I've joked about GT2 almost feeling like a randomizer straight out of the box because of stuff like this, but with some of these games, that sentiment might hit a little bit too close to home. In each of the first 3 Gran Turismos, there were events where you will receive a prize car based on a randomized roulette of a few possible options. In GT1, this was every special event except from the endurance races. In GT2, this was every championship and almost every endurance race, and in GT3, this was again every championship and endurance race. This is a double-edged sword, since on one hand, this can make the game more frustrating, as you may have to complete an event multiple times to win the car you want or need if it isn't available by any other means. But on the other hand, this does add some variability to your playthrough. As you're not guaranteed to get a certain car from a certain event, this creates branching paths based on which cars you do receive and decide to use. GT4 didn't include the prize car roulettes, and neither did GT5, but in special circumstances, you could instead earn prize car tickets in GT5. These weren't given out in the normal events, but a few could be earned from the special events, as well as getting trophies for every event in each series, and for every 100 races completed in the career. The cars available in each ticket were sorted based on a few things. For instance, there were tickets available for the type of car, such as classic muscle cars or modern rally cars. There were tickets based on the level of each car, as GT5 had a level system in which each car had a level attached to it which designated at which level the player had to be to buy it. There was also a 1000 ticket, which gave you a random chance to win any car in the game, and you would also receive one on your birthday with a car from roughly the year you had your PSN profile set to. Not to mention the numerous tickets which were discovered but never actually used in the game. The ticket system in GT5 is interesting, since rather than being a core part of the gameplay, it feels more like an additional bonus. As similar cars were often grouped together, there wasn't such a discrepancy between them, but it was still possible to get screwed over, such as getting a premium car, which can be bought at all times, versus a much harder to obtain standard car. But as the other possible prize cars are never shown to you, it can be a lot less frustrating than the roulettes in the previous games. The 1000 ticket is the exception, since you know you could get basically anything. So, when you inevitably get something like a Mitsubishi Colt, it's not the best.
Oh god.
Car tickets didn't return in Gran Turismo 6, and neither did they for Gran Turismo Sport, with the exception of one Spanish player who, after having an error which corrupted their GT Sport save file, mysteriously obtained 1000 tickets which replenished infinitely. Although in this case, the tickets were used to purchase cars rather than receive them as prizes, and as the cars could then be sold, that meant they effectively had infinite money. But for all players, GT Sport had the daily workout system, in which driving a set distance each day, 26.21 miles, meant you would receive a prize car at random. With a few exceptions, it is possible to obtain any car from one of these daily roulettes. But given that the single player was very much an afterthought, it was used more as a means of giving players cars over time, rather than fitting into any sort of structured progression. Roulette tickets appeared in GT7, no longer just for handing out cars, but all sorts of prizes, such as credits, unique tuning parts, and engine swaps. The tickets themselves come in grades, ranging from 1-star up to 6-star tickets with the best rewards. Compared to the roulettes of previous games, the ones in GT7 do not have specifically chosen prizes, a lot more is left up to chance. Just like GT Sport, these roulettes were given out for completing the daily workouts, but also at various points in the main campaign by finishing the menu book collections. Whilst you could make arguments for the roulettes in the previous games, it's a lot harder to do that with GT7. Most people kinda hate them. This is what happens when you push the element of luck too far. The roulette tickets in GT7 are used far more often than curated prizes, and the majority of the time, you'll receive hardly anything from them whilst being teased with some much better prizes. Whilst it isn't true to say that these roulettes are rigged, merely predetermined, it's easy to see why many people think this way given how the other prizes shown are just filler, and sometimes are literally impossible to obtain from that grade of ticket. When it comes to the cars specifically, this is again a mess, with a 4-star ticket, for example, giving you the chance to win an Audi TT or a Super Formula race car, and basically everything in between. There is not a huge amount of rhyme or reason, and sometimes after receiving a very good prize, you may just be left more confused than anything. If you want to understand a little bit more about how these prizes are determined, I'll leave a link to a website called GT7 Info in the description, which breaks down the probability of these prizes and did help me a lot in researching for this video. We've covered a lot of prize cars here. The ones that are completely redundant, the ones that can barely even be used, the ones that are extremely slow and underwhelming, the ones that don't make any sense, and the ones which are just left up to chance. But if there is a single prize which rules above all of them as the undisputed worst prize in Gran Turismo history, there can only be one. No prize car at all. Yes, whilst many consider prize cars as part of the fabric of Gran Turismo, there have been many occasions where none have been given out. Of course, not every situation warrants a prize car, but the omission of them in some cases does seem very odd. Take GT6. As I've mentioned a few times, GT6 has the most cars of any Gran Turismo game, almost 1300, which might be the most of any racing game ever, I'm not entirely sure. But the number of prize cars within GT6 may surprise you even more. For example, as previously stated, the number of prize cars in just GT2's special events is 67. But if you combine all of the prize cars in GT6's main career, as well as from the license tests, missions, and special events, including even a couple that were added in updates, the total number is 42. Just over 3% of the total car list can be won from events in GT6. And that's assuming you can even achieve gold on the missions and special events. One of the big reasons why there were so few prize cars in GT6 was due to how they were handled in the normal career mode events. Instead of handing them out for winning individual events, they're only given out for earning enough stars in each tier of events. You get a prize car in each tier for earning half of the available stars, and then a second for all of the stars. But in each tier, you normally only need 20 stars to move on, so it's actually possible to play through the game without earning any cars from the actual races. You don't need me to tell you how different an experience that is from the GTs of the past. GT2 is well known for its propensity to throw prize cars at the player. In most events, you earn a prize car from each individual race. But GT2 also lacks prize cars in some areas. Neither the Sunday Cup nor Clubman Cup give prize cars, and nor do any of the races in the National League. What I find is the most bizarre decision though, is to not give prize cars for any of the dirt events in GT2, which totals 27 races. Given that it was GT2's new flagship game mode, to relegate it to the background as they did always seemed very odd to me, and this is just another example of that. Anyway, the lack of prize cars is still a more recent phenomena, as we can see from GT6 and then GT Sport, which did give them out, but in a more contrived manner, owing to the fact that the career mode barely existed. But then with GT7, we saw the shift towards these prize roulettes, where cars have a very slim chance of being won. And outside of the 60 cars that you can earn from the menu books, no other races within the main World Circuits hub give you prize cars. Of course, having prize cars be such a core part of these games doesn't have to be a formality if they have other ideas to go alongside them, but winning a few thousand credits, or the ability to just buy a car, doesn't exactly live up to what came before. If we go back to the original Gran Turismo and head to the final championship, the GT World Cup, we can find something interesting. After completing the 5 races, you would probably be expecting to receive a prize car, as the game has conditioned you to expect up to this point. Maybe something good, like the Castrol Supra or GTR LM edition. But no, you don't receive any prize car. For beating the last and toughest championship in the game, this is a huge letdown, right? Well, not exactly. Because what you do receive, other than the ending credits, is a brand new game mode. GT HiFi. This mode is a high-fidelity version of Gran Turismo, as the name implies, taking place across the 3 nighttime circuits in the game. Now, to modernise, this doesn't seem that impressive. They're just 2-lap time trials at these circuits with simplified trackside details and running at 60 frames per second. But when you consider what GT1 was, and how much of a technical leap it offered all the way back in 1997, to have this preview of an even more enhanced version of the game must have been mind-blowing. As in, how could they make it any better? Not only did it look sharper and run smoother, it played smoother as well. The increased frame rates seemed to fix one of the biggest handling issues in GT1, which was how the cars would overreact when going over uneven surfaces, causing this bouncing effect. If the goal was to get people excited for the future of the franchise, then I'd say they succeeded with flying colours. Of course, they could have given a prize car as well, but given that it was the final championship, which you were intended to do last, then it wasn't really a big deal. As far as a unique reward goes, I'd say this one is pretty damn good. So, all of this is to say that yes, prize cars are a key part of the Gran Turismo experience, and this cannot be underestimated. Even when they're bad, I still think there's some enjoyment we can get just from discussing them, and even at their worst, they're still not as bad as some other things. But I'm all for experimentation, shaking up the formula and seeing what works. As usual, if you know of any more particularly bad or meme-worthy prize cars, then I'd love to know about them. I always try to think about this sort of stuff from a game design perspective, because that's what I find the most interesting, and hopefully you do as well. Anyway, for now, have a good one.